Okay, we are
Right,
recording.
man.
Cool. Okay, so hey everyone, welcome to the first Art-Wodcast. I am joined today by none other than Maarten Hermans. He's a good friend of mine. We met a couple of years ago at a comic convention, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
Yeah, we hit off quite well, and we've been art buddies ever since, I guess. Maarten has some really good stuff, really amazing stuff. I'm a big fan of his mechanical designs and just his illustration work in general. And I'll show you guys some of his work right now in the video to anyone that's watching the video and not listening to it. And yeah, without further ado, welcome Maarten.
Hey guys.
How are you doing, man?
I'm good, man. You're too kind, man. You're too kind.
No, really
Hey,
am a fan.
You're right, by the way, man. We met during this comic convention in Belgium.
Right.
And you were actually informing to follow my course, but you were already too good, man.
Oh, no, man. If I think back at that time, it was horrible. I think you were just too kind.
Nah.
I remember
I was a
in.
bit afraid,
I think I remember walking in and I saw you doing this kind of purpley piece with like a boat. It's like was a Chinese setting with a boat in the background, and was like immediately blown away. It's like, how does he do that? And I remember you recommending a book called "If It's Purple, It Means Someone's Going to Die."
Oh yeah, I love that book. Yeah.
I remember you were recommending that book, and I've read like halfway through it, but I haven't read it completely yet.
Yeah, well, I think it's more or less a guide as well, not a page by page reader, so that will totally work. So it's it's still one of my favorites, to be honest, and it's one of the most, for me, abstract ways of thinking about color.
Right.
And its use. And what I like about it especially is that it doesn't really involve, if I remember correctly, spaceships or trolls and elves, and it's just classic cinema.
Yeah, it's classic cinema. Yeah. And it doesn't have that like generic sense of color theory.
Yeah,
it's much more in depth, and it's really cool book.
Yeah, it's really like a psychological approach to using color, which is awesome.
Yeah, exactly. No, so the main reason I'm doing these podcasts and just the inviting guests in general is that I wanna talk to people who are highly interested in the way we learn art and how we teach art, because you're a teacher yourself, and a very good one at that. So before we dive into the technicalities of art learning and stuff like that, I just wanted to know what would you say draws you to visual development?
Oh man, that's a question that's hard to explain with just one answer, I think.
We have time.
I don't know, man. It's very visceral. And I think it goes back as far as I can remember, like really as in being like a kid and seeing. I don't know. I've always been very interested in intricate set designs and vehicles and everything that has a weird function as well. And I couldn't really pinpoint it back to one occasion, but I guess you can say like the point where I really got extremely excited was with seeing one of the first Fangzhou Design School cinema episodes on YouTube.
Yeah.
Which was really back in the day. There wasn't really anything else besides maybe GNOME workshops.
Yeah.
And you also had conceptart.org forums. May it rest in peace.
Yeah. True.
But realizing that was an actual job changed absolutely everything for me.
Yeah, same here.
So I don't know, man. I think it's like as much of a part of me as my fingernails or my hair, or it's just baked right into my genes or something.
Has it always been that way? Because you mentioned Feng Zhu, right? And he's not on YouTube for that long. I mean,
No.
we're both in our 30s. So have you always been intrigued with art, or has it like developed in recent years?
I think now that you ask that question, this is the first time I really see it this clearly, if I can put it like this. I think I've always been more interested in design than in the art side of it. And with design, I don't mean like an Eames chair or anything. I mean just like how the interior of a spaceship might look like, or how you can cramp like an interior like with sleeping quarters and control room and anything, and a bridge inside a little tube that goes underwater. And I remember back in the days when I might have been 7 or like barely able to read, 6 or 7 years. And we went to the local library, which is actually now 200 meters away from my house. Renting like books on how medieval castles worked, and how basically anything, how ships worked, and how a lot of mechanical stuff and a lot of vehicle stuff. And I that just really got me, and it developed into a point where I was just in my spare time almost nonstop reading or learning, how all this stuff worked. And I guess that really, really helped in developing an eye for stuff, I think, especially design, that is.
Definitely, man, because that really resonates in your art. I mean, when I look at how you've grown recently, and just even when you were in your early development, you've always been interested in how things function.
Yeah.
Right. And you're always interested in creating like a nice aesthetic around something functional, right? That's always been like your base, especially with your Marv project. You can see that you go into the research, and that's something that I think I've mentioned to you already. Like, if I could inherit one thing from you artistically, it would be the patience that you put into your projects. Like, you really research what you want out of your projects, and you want them you want that intrinsic detail on how things function, and how everything around that, those objects would integrate with each other and stuff like that. So that's something that really cool, and that it's good to hear that you've been interested in these things from a very early age.
Yeah.
That's nice. That's cool.
Mind you, though, I gotta say there are some guys out there, like if I think about Vitaly Bulgarov, for instance, or the Dutch guy Idon Gurazio, they take stuff like this so much further than I do. But I guess it's also a matter of choice, with Marv, for instance. There's a lot of vehicles in Marv, but in the end, I don't really think it's about the vehicles. It's about like the culture, and it's about the day-to-day moments that develop around having weird technology,
right?
And having the opportunity to fly around at will, and But I guess I've always been attracted to stuff that really screams out the function it has.
Yeah, you can definitely see that.
Instead of really, you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. It's I would also say that with my students where I teach, usually especially with vehicles, you can always tell that the function was added later. They make like a sketch, and then they pay attention to cool shape design, and and then they go like, and now let's place this huge gun on top of it, or let's a crane hook, or anything really.
Yeah. That seems to be like a general crutch in the industry, though. That there's a lot of emphasis on the graphic design, and then like build the functionality around that. And don't get me wrong, there are definitely IPs where design follows function.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it seems like in a lot of the industry, it seems to be the other way around, right?
Well, yeah, I think what you're describing is I don't know, I guess you can call it like the 3D code trend,
Yeah,
where you got people and they you know, they sketch a spaceship that looks really cool shape wise, and you know, with rendering techniques becoming easier, you know, you can light it nicely and cinematically, and then with a few blur filters and all, you know, it starts to look nice really quickly, but then when you break it down, it tends to lack function in some way.
Right.
And I think it's like, for my designs, I would say that sometimes the shape design is not what it should be, you know? And I guess I could benefit from doing a process like that.
I don't know. I think that's what kind of makes your designs stand out, and like other, especially like when I look at product designers or guys like George Hull, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're not only concerned with the shape, but definitely very much so with the function.
Yeah.
And that kind of always gives you more, I think, realistic looking or contemporary looking designs that have believability. I think the believability factor is sometimes very hard to perceive in like these very cool, flashy, very well built designs. Whereas the things you have with Marv, for instance, you can almost see yourself riding in one of these, you know, hovercrafts, or, you know, and that's something that makes it believable, and it makes the audience attach to the design.
Yeah, well, I think that's mainly because, you know, when you have the design that's partially designed from function or from the inside out, it tends to tell a story, you know. And all those little mechanical details tend to tell a little story on how it can be used, or how it might move, or how fast it might go, or anything really.
Right.
And I think with those form over function designs, it's kind of like telling the beginning and the end of a story, but without having the arc in between that tells you how you get there.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. That's a nice, it's a nice metaphor. Yeah.
I don't know. I think it might be similar to that. That's not to say that there aren't really fucking awesome. Sorry, can I swear on the show?
Yeah, you can swear. You can swear.
Shit, fuck, bitch. Right, awesome.
I encourage it. No, I don't encourage it. I don't encourage it, kids.
Yeah, just and stay in school, kids.
Stay in school.
No, like if you look at Daniel Simon, for instance. I mean, that guy is just. I don't even think we might even remotely become competition. It's just this guy is running his own race.
Yeah.
And he's
like
not
literally.
Yeah. Like, pun intended.
That's true.
And a lot of his stuff starts with like the automotive style form first.
Yeah.
But maybe I think it might be also because the guy is crazily educated on the topics of aerodynamics.
Yeah, well,
and
true.
How, you know, so it's still functional. You know,
I think isn't he like a product designer first and foremost?
Yeah,
because he designed watches and stuff, right?
Oh yeah, well?
And cars,
I think he did work on the Bugatti Veyron or
right. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. He's absolutely a nutcase when it comes to design. And
so as you can see, like technical knowledge is like one of his strengths.
Yeah, I think it is actually. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. I don't think you'll get a job with like Volkswagen or Bugatti or anything if you don't understand like the actual functionality of things. So I guess it's not like an aesthetic designer in the pure sense of the word. Well, no, not aesthetic. You know what I mean? Like the
I get
over function. Yeah.
Yeah. So now you're a teacher, right? For how long have you been a teacher?
I've been doing this now for, I would 6 years.
6 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And what made you become a teacher in the first place?
Um, well, it's not like your traditional trajectory where you go, and now I would like to transfer my craft. And I've actually been following a course that was pretty much brand new.
Okay.
And I would say, like, nearly after graduating it, I got the offer to teach like a few classes as well. Not with the intent to become like a full-time teacher, but the guy hosting it, I think he liked my approach, and he saw that I was helping people in the course as well.
Right.
And so he offered me, to do a few guest classes and see how things go. And I sort of rolled in teaching before actually working actively on big projects and all, which was hard in the beginning, because there was this gnawing sense of you're not working on AAA projects yet, but you're teaching,
Right.
But I stuck with it, and I think the teaching really helped me maintain like a sharp edge in learning myself. So it's like a symbiotic relationship, really.
Exactly. That's actually what I wanted to segue in. It's like, and would you agree that teaching is very much a part of learning as a professional?
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is, right?
Yeah,
I think that's what you see. Like the old saying goes, like those who can't do teach, right?
yeah,
Which I think is complete nonsense, especially when it comes to a very technical and like forever evolving endeavors like we do.
Yeah.
Because when you learn something, like as a student, when you learn something, you need to just learn, the fundamentals and the craft. But when you need to teach it, you really need to fucking understand it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Otherwise, there's no point in teaching it.
Right?
Exactly. And if you look at guys like where all the good books come from, right? Loomis, George Bridgman, all of those guys, Scott Robertson, they are teachers, and they're still considered one of the best in the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really hate that saying as well. I guess there is some truth in it in some schools and with some teachers, absolutely. But in general, like I think one of my number one mission when I was a teacher in the beginning years was to not be an example of that statement.
Right.
Like I really, really desperately wanted to be the real deal.
Yeah.
And I think I'm pretty sure people notice that as well, And I often also mentioned that I was like still in the beginning of my journey as well. Like I've never tried to hide that fact,
Yeah.
But I think it's perfectly possible as a teacher, like to be on your journey yourself and just point people in the right way, in the right direction, without actually having to be on the destination itself. I think
that's the thing, right? It's like helping the people with their own self-discovery, because most of art is basically self-discovery.
Yeah.
That's something that I advocate as well in the and that's what I think makes the Art-Wod program as successful as it has been. It's that what I give the students is structure, but they have to discover all the things that you need to discover themselves, right? It's just that through application, you will get there. And I think that's what, makes Art-Wod a good program. And, brick and mortar schools like where you're teaching is that, and that's some of the, I'd say the contradiction with tutorials is like tutorials is this kind of here's a fish, instead of with a school, it's like, I'm going to teach you how to fish, right? It's that old saying where in a tutorial, you usually get to follow a certain process of an artist that has already created its own shortcuts on how to do certain things, right? Because they understand the fundamentals that they need to get to that result.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a dangerous thing. Not all tutorials, because there are some amazing tutorials out there. But especially when you're a beginner, when you're following these tutorials, it's that you're picking up on a process that you probably do not master yet yourself, right? Because you're picking from the brain of someone that has already gone through the fundamentals and has created their own shortcuts or broken their own rules in order to create their own style, right?
Yeah.
And I think that as a teacher, if you really understand what you kind of need to teach people, it's you're kind of giving them, basically you're giving them the fundamentals, right? Because they're there for a reason. And you teach people on how they can master those fundamentals and then learn to break them themselves, right? Because it's still a process of self-discovery. Even if you're in a school, it's and I think that's the biggest difference in the art community, especially, is that if you in the traditional sense, when you go to school, it takes 4 years. When you after high school, it takes 4 years to graduate, you get a diploma, and you're off to work. Right.
Yeah.
And I think with art, that's just almost impossible to do. You can definitely do those 4 years and get a good sense of what the fundamentals are, and you can probably get a professional looking body of work, but you're still not in that, I'd say, self-discovery, level. And definitely not in the rule breaking level, right? Where,
oh God, no.
That's even something that I don't even feel I'm there yet. It's I'm still learning.
No,
those
I'm still discovering the rules, man.
Exactly, still discovering the rules. That's the thing.
Yeah. No, but you're absolutely right, and I think especially like when we I don't know how it is in other countries, of course, but when we talk about those traditional programs in Belgium, you have 4 years, but that's not just 4 years of learning art. Like a very small percentage of that is learning art. And then you have a whole bunch of other stuff, which is very interesting. Like, don't get me wrong. And I think it's very useful to learn that stuff. But that's not what you get hired for in the end. And I think that's quite a problem if you think about it, right? Like, let's say you want to become a car mechanic. And then they go like, but first, we need you to learn the entire history of a car. But I don't know how the engine works. No, just the history of the car.
It's true.
I memorized that shit,
Yeah.
I want you to know, like, what exact year this little part of the piston was discovered. And, like, that's nice to know. And I'm sure it will make you a better mechanic over the years. But first and foremost, man, you need to learn how the engine works, right?
Exactly.
You need to learn how to unscrew stuff and like the very, very basic stuff. And I think that gets ignored a little bit too much in those traditional, at least Belgium programs.
Yeah, very much in Belgium. I'd say it gets almost completely ignored at this stage. Like, because when you look at even like figure drawing classes in universities, if you look at what they're teaching there, they're not even teaching fundamentals. All they're teaching is more like, and I'm talking universities here, right? It's like, I know, just draw what you see and what you feel. And I think that's that's fine in a very, very hippie artistic sense. But it will not make you a professional artist. And I even researched the horrifying statistics where I believe that in Belgium, 85% of people that graduate from artistic educations do not do anything with their diploma. And of those 15% that does something with it, almost half or over half just become teachers in that same institution.
Yeah. Which is quite sad, really, if you think about it. It's
super sad. I mean, the amount of money and education is not as expensive in Belgium as it is in other countries, and especially not in America. But still, like, you're wasting 4 years of your time.
Yeah, well, I think if like art is your, well, it is for everyone, but if it's like a vehicle of understanding your emotional self and, like almost in a therapeutic sense, I guess that's perfectly fine. But
Yeah, but do you
for
think
people who are,
an 18-year-old goes to school with that in mind?
well,
That's a
no,
very
no,
mature
no,
mature
probably not.
thought set, right? It's more of a psychology philosophy, and I do get
Yeah.
that. And even for adults, that might be a good education. But from the outset, if you look at people that are in their early 20s, what they want to do is they want to become professional artists, and they usually want to do something that we're doing, or something in that vicinity, and
Hmm.
almost always that will require a traditional training method.
Yeah. Yeah. And almost always, from at least what I've heard, is that now we're just batching on traditional schools, really, but is that they don't really, there's not much respect going towards the whole concept art and illustration,
Right.
well, video game illustration industry, and it's tend to look that it's sort of like frowned upon, and it's almost like it's like a sellout way of making art. Or at least that's like the impression I get from.
It's the impression, but I think that's only from those universities, because if you look at fine art, which they don't teach in universities anymore, there's only like a very small number of ateliers that do it, especially in Europe, and you have some more in countries like or continents like America.
Yeah.
In those ateliers, you now see a lot of concept art students and illustration students joining those ateliers, just because, and those ateliers embrace people like that because they know that people are there to learn the fundamentals, and it's through those fundamentals that people can up their game.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like very basic exercises in the beginning also, really. It's
Yeah.
not even not it's not like magical deep philosophical stuff. It's just like this is perspective,
Yeah.
This is basic shape design.
Exactly.
This is the kind of feelings that a rectangle will evoke.
Yeah.
It's not even that hard to find, really. So it's weird the way things are going and the
It
way
is.
things have evolved.
Because I'm not sure, how long does your course last? Is it like 1 year?
Yeah, it's 1 year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the prime focus? How do you stage it through that 1 year? Are there different stages at which you teach people things?
Yeah. It's sort of like a traditional school year, I think. Well, at least a European school year. We have three major parts.
Right.
And the first part is like an initiation module. And it has all the basics in there, perspective, composition, anatomy, design, and of course, learning to work with stuff like Photoshop and 3D software. And all of that gets like a specialization course in the second part, and then the third part is basically just building a big project and getting very personal guidance throughout building that project, so that you can actually learn how to do something
Right.
in not just a standalone painting or a standalone character, but an actual project with like a design philosophy and
Right.
with
a world building on a small scale.
sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you can say that.
Okay. And you feel like, well, I know how you feel like it, but do you think that you get enough time to teach people those fundamentals in those like first, or those first two parts of the year? Do you see it pay off? I think that's
oh
a better
yeah,
question.
that absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
You
Okay.
can totally see it pay off. But it being enough, like it's enough to learn them, but it's like to really have it in your DNA, that just takes a while.
And
I don't really know if there's.
Did you shape the curriculum yourself, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Which is kind of the advantage that we get over there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And what would you like? Because like Art-Wod is built around the message of efficient learning. So what would you define? what would you define that is efficient learning for a beginner? And what would you then maybe define efficient learning for an intermediate or a professional artist?
I would say as a beginner, get first, like, get those things out of the way that hold you back from actually designing cool stuff.
Right.
And I think the major ones in those are definitely perspective and anatomy, and learning the basics of shape language, and learning the basics of shape design and stuff like, and your basic design principles like rhythm and like creating like harmony inside a design. Which, if you really think about it, it comes down taste for some parts.
Yeah, very much.
But in the end, it's like there's something called universal taste.
Yeah,
where
true.
The general public tends to lean towards certain proportions and certain color compositions, and it's not a mystery. Yeah, and of course you'll have people who won't like something. But in general, most people like the same thing when it comes down to shapes and design and readability of a composition. And like, first learn how those work,
Right.
And then I would say, as an intermediate artist, I forgot one of the most important ones in the beginner part is, like, just learn the basics of light.
Right.
Like, don't learn every single lighting scenario and all the complex and subtleties in it, but just the basics of, like, this is light and this is how a shadow is being casted.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
this is like the three major components of direct light, indirect light, and bounce light. Just those basic three things, and just learn how they work and why sometimes a shadow is a lot longer than other times, and learn to combine that with shape design. Like, how do I light this object so that the shape reads most optimal?
Yeah.
And or not, if that's what you're going for, right?
Yeah.
And I guess then. Oh, sorry?
Yeah, well, it kind of reminds me of a quote from Jesper Esching, one of the Magic the Gathering artists. I'm going to paraphrase it, but what he basically says is that people are sometimes too concerned with, like, realistic lighting. Mm-hmm. And what you should consider instead is that in fantasy, the lighting is just always ideal.
Yeah.
For every object, for every character, they just have ideal lighting, because in the end it's fantasy, right?
Yeah.
And that will make that will probably elevate your illustrations already to, or your designs to a completely different level.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's true, yeah. Because in the end, it's like you say, the fantasy arts, the lighting is always like the perfect lighting conditions.
Exactly.
It always comes down to lighting the right part in a painting. And yeah.
But I mean, why wouldn't it? Why would we choose for boring lighting, or for realistic lighting for that matter? Because sometimes it's boring, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sometimes realistic light can be so extremely boring.
And not even in illustration. I mean, if you look at it in cinematic lighting, it's almost always ideally lit for silhouetting, right? It's almost always backlit, atmospheric lighting, very, very high key or very low key, but almost always silhouetted.
Yeah, that's
There's like
true.
No super complex lighting scenarios going on. It's usually pretty simple. I think the art of simplification is a major one.
Oh yeah, also, and I think that might be part of, like, the second or the more intermediate part of the learning process is how do I look, for instance, at nature or at a person or anything, and just get rid of what's not contributing to the message.
Yeah. Yes.
And the message, that doesn't really have to be landscape painting necessarily.
Yeah.
But just like, how do I convey the right message, and like, how do I get rid of what doesn't have to be there?
I think that's you see a very good example of that in the Daily Spit Paint group on Facebook.
Oh yeah,
where you have, if you like, there's always, for people that don't know the Daily Spit Paint group, is they usually announce like 4 different themes or subjects from which you can choose, and you can paint like an illustration or a design based on that subject within 30 minutes. So it has to be within a 30-minute time frame. And the most noticeable thing is that when you see a professional do a spit paint versus a beginner, is that the beginner will concern himself with everything that can be in the scene, and they will clutter the scene with as much information as they can, making everything very noisy. Whereas a professional will just use the simplest way possible to convey the message, and it's almost always the most beautiful way as well.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I think that's almost like a law of nature, isn't it?
It's true.
Like that the simplest. I think it's like a law of some. It probably has a name, but the simplest solution is
the most
probably
elegant.
the best.
It's
probably the best. Like, and it's also a law that, if I'm not mistaken, that the most simple explanation is probably the right one. If I think I read that somewhere.
Sometimes, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, the simplest. Yeah, not the easiest, but the simplest.
No.
Yeah,
definitely not the easiest, but the simplest. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true. So now, talking about simplification, there's a lot of difference in picture making, and especially throughout these last couple of years, right? So ever since actually I've been a professional, 3D has been a major part in 2D visual development, right?
Yeah.
So, and I know that I'm not... I'm not that big of a guy on 3D because I'm just not efficient with it, or it just doesn't fit my style sometimes. But you have definitely found a nice balance between 3D and 2D, right?
Yeah. So, I think it's slowly getting there. Yeah.
So what would you recommend artists do in the beginning, even if they're not interested in 3D? It might like greatly elevate their art. So what would you recommend them do in that regard?
What do you mean in terms of trying to get interested in learning 3D?
Yeah, maybe.
Or just like,
or like how they can learn to integrate it into their 2D process?
Well, I would say like first and foremost, get used to the fact that in the beginning, the combination of 3D and 2D will probably look like shit.
Yeah.
Just like accept that, because it will take you a while to sort of find that fine line between this is awesome and this looks like crap.
Right.
Or like you can totally see that this part is 3D and this part isn't. And I think that's like one major thing. But one other thing is also that you need to allow yourself, especially like when you're learning, when you're still learning is allow yourself to sort of experiment with finding an artistic way to do 3D, because for a lot of people they dive into 3D and it's like too technical and it's too awkward and it's too I would say too right brain sided.
Yeah, that's a good way to explain it. Yeah,
and I guess you could say that for me personally, it wasn't the most fair process, because I tend to, when I design something, I tend to start with function anyways.
Yeah.
So, and 3D is awesome for that.
Yeah.
But when you're like a guy, and I think for character people, 3D is a lot harder too, by the way.
Yeah.
I guess those people are more left-sided designers anyways. So, but it's hard to like pinpoint where the 3D process goes wrong with 2D artists. It's much more of a like case-to-case development. But I think the most important part is to like accept that you're not going to find that balance right away, because I see a lot of people, they open 3D.
Yeah.
Especially like my students, I advise them to mock up stuff in 3D a lot.
Okay.
Also, like the people who really want to work stylized, because that really works nice as well. And because it's like a strain, and because it's diverting them from like the left brain way of thinking, they tend to just avoid it. They tend to just, and I think it just takes a while for people to sort of combine those.
Yeah. It's sort of a hard balance though, right? Because
it is, yeah.
There are many merits and advantages to learning 3D.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think sometimes the problem is, and I think you probably see this with your students as well, is that a lack of fundamental knowledge, especially when it comes to perspective and turning form in perspective yourself, not with the help of 3D. Is a very crucial skill to have before going into 3D, because you're very accustomed with 3D and you use 3D in your designs. But when we look at your sketches, for instance, they already have a very good sense of perspective, form, 3D. And you were doing this probably before you were really getting your teeth into 3D. So it's a hard balance for people to like. What would you recommend? Would you recommend that they start early on with 3D, or that they first go through the steps of learning those core fundamentals like perspective and organic forms and complex shapes in perspective before venturing into that 3D realm?
Honestly, I think, and especially like if you're someone who wants to do realistic stuff, but also for stylized people, but much more for realistic artists, I would say like get into 3D fast.
Okay,
like
that's
do
interesting.
it. Just start with it. It's almost simultaneously with learning 2D, because you can sort of develop the same processes alongside of each other. I believe that really, but I do want to say that the fundamentals are like it's no. I don't think side by side is the right comparison. I think it's much more of a on top of each other. I think you can build the 3D part on top of the fundamental part simultaneously. But you need to work on that fundamental part constantly.
Yeah.
It's because I can you know those really bad git bashed mech designs.
Yeah.
Which comes from someone knowing 3D and downloading, probably illegally downloading like a pack of git bash parts and just bashing them together in something that looks remotely okay, lighting it really realistically, because that's what rendering software does.
Yeah.
And the mech makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it looks sort of cool, and especially if you show it to people that don't know shit about it.
Yeah.
But someone with like an artistic eye or a design sense, he or she will look right through it.
Yeah. That's why that's actually why I'm a bit on the other fence of this argument. That's why I would actually, and that's why I recommend my students mostly, is that they first go through that like 2D process of problem solving, because I think like almost 90% of our job description is problem solving. And I think that's what many people sometimes, especially beginners, misunderstand about the job description, especially if you want to go for concept art. They think that, and it's been debunked a lot of times online, I know that, but people still have that notion that we are doing pretty designs all the time. And even today, like if you see art books, it's always the cream of the crop, right? It's the coolest designs that make it to the art books. And I think like to get to a really effective design, you need to go to a ton of problem solving. And I think that you can only cultivate that problem solving by going through those fundamentals like advanced perspective and, dissecting complex shapes in perspective, like, which I recommend in like the book Sketching the Basics, which is from product designers, or Scott Robertson, those guys really nail it down on how you can see complex form and how you can break up shapes. And I think if you don't have a good notion on how to do that, and you dive into 3D and still you want to do it simultaneously, you kind of miss some of that, or you don't cultivate it as you could. Yeah. I mean, I'm on the other fence of that argument, and I can see that you definitely believe that it can do both. But I think it's kind of hard to really train that problem solving aspect when you're already in 3D that early on in development. And I'm saying this to beginning artists, not professionals, right? Because professionals constantly evolve their skill set, and whether that integrates 3D or not, that doesn't matter, because that's just efficiency when it comes to 3D. It's just like what I'm comparing it to is the same like photo bashing. That what I compare it to is if you want to build like furniture or something, and you don't know how to hold a screwdriver, but you're already using power tools, right? It's kind of that. It's more efficient to use power tools, but if you don't know how things work with a normal screwdriver, you're kind of setting yourself up for trouble.
Yeah, no, but that's absolutely true, and that's why I also say that like the 3D part has to be built on top of the existing building blocks of fundamentals. So like I wouldn't say do 3D first and then learn fundamentals, but I would just say it's like start learning fundamentals and then muster up the courage to also open Blender and start moving boxes around with applying everything that you just learned about that fundamental stuff.
Yeah. No, I do agree that perspective, like even like opening, like you said, opening up Blender and just manipulating boxes and simple shapes will get you a better sense of perspective on a 2D plane as well. Because that really helped for me. Once you know that Y, Z, and X axis, and you understand that concept, it gets easier on paper as well. That's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think like it helps because I see a lot of young students that still they have a lot of trouble seeing their design as a 3D object, which is pretty much necessary for every project that you do today.
Yeah, very much
because
so.
2D stuff is so rare and I'm not saying you can't pursue a career in like 2D animation, but just know that it like your job opportunities will be a lot more narrow.
Yeah.
That's just the way that the industry works.
That's very true.
So I think it just helps people understand things as a 3D shape instead of just like a 2D thing that works from one pose. And this is hard to recreate in another pose. And it helps people understand proportions, and not just like aesthetic proportions, but also like, let's say, human interaction proportions. Like the number of times that I see designs coming in with like a ladder or a staircase and a chair that's just ridiculous in proportions is just
Yeah.
it's crazy, and that's all right. That's all right. But I think 3D can really help people learn to understand shapes in its entirety and not just like as an artistic sketch.
Yeah.
And plus, also, like, I agree wholeheartedly with the idea that it's most first and foremost about problem solving, you know. And I think for a lot of people starting out, the learning how to solve a problem can be very hard when you're also learning how to draw.
Yeah.
But it can be a little bit easier to overcome if you can open a 3D software package and do like the first stage of those proportional problem solving issues with a few boxes and a few cylinders, and you know, like let your brain work on the problem instead of like the drawing aspect of things. And then you can come back and make a nice drawing out of it. And, you know, you'll soon discover if you don't know perspective and you start drawing or painting on top of a 3D model, you know, it goes to shit really fast.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's still really necessary.
Yeah.
But
like in those, because I know that you have students from all walks of life and you know, from all levels of experience. Do you see like an overarching, I'd say, struggle that they have with one specific or particular thing, or like a recurring struggle in one of the fundamental aspects of art learning, or is it different per student?
It's definitely different per student, but I would say in general, the hardest thing is to design anything that humans have to interact with. Anything really, from a door to,
Right.
And let it like it sucks that this basically means hard surface stuff, but not like in the ArtStation way of the word. I don't mean robots and mech suit. I just mean like anything from a medieval bridge that needs to be drawn to anything or that has to perform a certain function. Is I see a lot of people having trouble with that, and I think that really stems from not really understanding stuff enough.
Yeah, like would you say?
I get it.
Due to a lack of research, or
basically due to a lack of not going deep enough on how certain things work, and that's why like a lot of classes, and especially in the beginning of the year, consist of me showing stuff on YouTube.
Right.
And I don't mean like PewDiePie stuff, you know. I mean you have a lot of crazy how-to videos on YouTube, or there's like this channel of a guy that shows off very rare gun designs, like really really weird stuff. And he goes into such deep detail on how it was designed and why it was designed and what the flaws were and why this weapon isn't used anymore, or why it was hardly used, and it just gives you like this rich library of things. And you know, like you don't have to invent a lot of people have done a lot of crazy shit, like a lot of crazy shit. And that's actually like one of my major design tips. Is like people do crazy shit. So whenever you're in doubt, just look at history and see what kind of weird stuff people have done.
Yeah, reality is often stranger than fiction.
Yeah,
True.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, that people, especially students, tend to neglect the research part. And I think for you and I both, that kind of, when we get commissioned for something, especially if it's a design, we also quote the research part, because it's a big part of the design process, right? You're not just only, as soon as you get the brief, you're putting pen to paper, right? You usually go through, your research, how things function, especially if it's something new that you don't understand what it is. If it's something like, for me, if it's characters, I can, I've done enough character design that I can do that.
Yeah.
But if it's like building design or weapon design or stuff like that, it definitely requires that research phase, because none of us, or almost none of us, are Kim Young-jis, so we don't understand everything from every object. So we definitely need that research.
But I bet the guy only understands so much is because he also studied so much.
Yeah, it's basically what he says, right?
Yeah, and perhaps not like in a very conscious way, like picking up a book and actually sitting down trying to understand something. But it's just like this years long process of looking at things and trying to figure out how things were put together, and it's not
he's actually the prime example of learning through application. What he basically does is almost always like plein air studies, right? He goes outside, he looks at things, he draws them in his sketchbook, and he makes a conscious study of it. And then it becomes a subconscious matter. Yeah.
That's mental. That's absolutely mental. I should really get down to doing stuff like that, because it's been a while, man, since I've actually been outside to draw something.
Same. But we can blame it on Corona, even if it's not Corona.
Yeah.
So you've recently started working for OPB, right?
Yeah.
Which is, for the people that know OPB is One Pixel Brush. It's run by Shady Safadi, if I'm not mistaken.
Shady
Safadi, okay.
Yeah. Shady
sounds a bit shady. Shady Safadi, and they're one of the most prestigious concept art houses on the planet. And I was just basically wondering, has your view on picture making changed since you started working for them? And how has your, generally from the moment you started professionally, how has your process and your basic view on picture making changed throughout these years?
Man, that's a lot to take in. I would say I've only been working with One Pixel Brush now for about half a year.
Okay.
And I think the most important thing that I've picked up are two things. Is one, is the actual storytelling, what's the symbolism behind the shapes that you're creating, and behind the light and dark patterns that you're creating, and creating little subtle differences in value and color, and just to get the right mood.
Right.
And I would say I've really only started to understand how to use fog efficiently since I've started working for OPB, because those guys are just crazy with how they use fog to create depth, and especially how subtle it can be.
Yeah.
That has been my major.
Yeah. Well,
my
their
major
company is named
point.
Perfectly, right? One Pixel Brush. I mean, they're all about subtlety.
Yeah, and it's also I'll dive into the working process a little later. Not too much, because Shady has a lot of videos out there on how OPB works.
Right.
But another thing that I really learned, and I'm not doing it enough yet, is to actually really dive into the right process for the image you're creating. And that means learning new pieces of software or Blender plugins almost every week.
Really?
And yeah. Which is really fun,
Yeah.
And really, and it really opens up your eyes. And for me, a lot of times my work quality goes up a notch when I finally learned to work with this plugin that I've been avoiding for a few months.
Right.
With the thing that's intimidating me the most. Right. So that's also been Shady just pushes you to do the right thing. He's basically I don't care if you've been painting characters this whole time. Now you're gonna use this program.
Right.
And we're gonna light it and we're gonna pose it, and one that I still need to learn is Marvelous Designer.
Yeah.
For people who don't know it, it's like a cloth simulation.
Yeah. It's a
You
handful.
can basically, and you can basically make clothes and other drapery, but based on actual physics.
Yeah.
You know, you just design the clothes, and the program designs the folds and the gravitational forces and everything for you.
Yeah,
I
remember
how to design clothes.
I remember working with Matthias in in Charleroi. We were on a random project, and I remember how meticulous he was about Marvelous Designer. How he just loved the folds that were created and the clothing, and there's really this mindset of creating those subtleties in clothing and just everything that they do. So it was really cool to see.
Yeah, and I guess that's also like part of that OPB mentality, which is like really, besides like getting the right bigger graphical message, is also about like the tiny things.
Yeah.
But we do get time to devote energy in the little things. So
cool.
It's not that like we have to finish something in half a day. We usually get like, I would say 3 days, perhaps even a little bit more, to finish one image. But this is also like an interesting thing, which you mentioned previously, is that often to get like the right solution, we have to try out a lot of different things, right?
Yeah. And I guess that's a big thing in OPB, or that you go through. Do you guys go through a lot of iterations?
Not really. Really. Well,
wow.
At least not most of the time we don't.
Okay.
Because like Shadi really, he and I believe in this as well. It's like this approach of, he likes us to find the best solution for something, and then just present that
from the outset.
Yeah. Don't do like 20 comps and send that to the client, and then make a combination between 3 comps. And he just wants you to like really analyze the brief and really analyze like what kind of feeling that you want to create, and what mood and all of that, and what the story is, and then just present the best solution for that.
Right. That's a cool approach.
Particular problem. Yeah,
it takes a lot of confidence, though.
Yeah, it's very it can be quite stressful at sometimes. Yes.
Yeah.
And also an interesting development, I would say, is that we do a lot of stuff in 3D now, like a lot.
Yeah.
For some, I recently just finished some stuff for quite a well-known IP. Actually, I'm not allowed to say which one, but I know that will be announced in a few months, or I don't know when.
Awesome.
But anyways, I think about 97% of it was 3D, and then the other 3% was just like
finishing up in Photoshop,
making the 3D render look a bit less cringy.
Yeah.
You can really be like, it's there, like blurring subtle edges, making perfect imperfections in textures, and it's like putting this extra layer of love on top of the render.
Yeah.
But it's
It's a bit of a deviation from your recent stuff, though, right? If we look at your Marv project, it's very stylized. Right?
Yeah.
It does incorporate 3D, but I imagine like the projects that you work on with OBB are very realistic, as they are like 97% 3D.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you feel like there's...
Not all of them. These were exceptional because they were like real interior designs of a fancy building.
Okay.
So it comes down to applying the right or like the most efficient technique, because like if you're gonna do like a I don't know, like an apocalyptical forest scene, it perfectly makes sense to just work with the right pictures, and like you're not gonna model an entire forest. You might start out with some 3D models of trees and stuff to block things in, or even use like plugins that generate ivy across surfaces and all.
Right.
It's not for every single image, and I think Shadi also showed some images done by the Florent,
Yeah.
which were done entirely with photos.
Right.
But I'll just put it like this: I don't think we will ever just like entirely paint something anymore.
Right. No, I get that. Yeah. Yeah. It's
No,
just
not
they
like-
have a common house style as well, you know. This,
Yeah, they have very, very recognizable
Yeah,
style. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And do you see some of that process creep into your personal stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's very hard to pinpoint what it is, but I think it's especially like with subtleties and like I really like, especially when you look at the art drop from The Last of Us 2, which made me cry multiple times.
Yeah.
Since.
I like the hand drawn stuff, but you know, that's just me.
Well, I like it all, to be
Yeah.
honest. You know, I don't have like a specific liking for one particular thing.
Yeah.
But which strikes me the most is like how subtle things can be in those images.
Yeah.
And that's what I really like about. And it's very keyframe based too.
Very
You
much.
know,
Yeah.
it's like how things work in one image, and well, of course, the design has to be well executed as
Yeah.
well. It's not just like photo bash some stuff together and ta-da.
Yeah, sure.
It goes pretty damn deep.
Yeah. All right.
But
Cool.
it really makes you think about stuff, you know.
Yeah, I think that's the main stuff, right? And if I hear you say it, it's like their emphasis has become more and more on narrative exploration and just getting the message right.
Yeah.
And the medium doesn't matter whether it is a lot of 3D because you kind of need to get that certain look and style. But
Yeah.
I imagine if you needed to do a more stylized project with them, the philosophy would be the same, right? Get the narrative correct and then just use whatever media necessary to get that image.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, cool.
But that's not to say, you know, that there aren't studios out there anymore that really paint stuff. And I think there's a niche for everyone, you know, because I know a lot of students of mine, they tend to panic when they hear like the technical process that goes behind it.
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't, if that really like, if you get disgusted by that, that's okay, man. You know, there's another route for you out there somewhere.
Yeah.
But it probably will not be one pixel brush, right?
No, yeah. I think that's the overarching thing that I have discovered personally myself is that regardless of the style that you're going for, the main thing you should be content with as an artist is the process.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the result. You should enjoy the process. And that's not this philosophical thing like you should enjoy the journey. It's really like, I have a good example with my art, for instance. I have very line art based stuff and I have very shape based stuff, like the paintings that I did, like the butcher and stuff like that. The thing is, though, I do not enjoy that process. And they're one of my most popular paintings. But because I can easily, you know, paint them out, but I don't enjoy the process, so I'm not pursuing that anymore.
Yeah.
Because it just doesn't fulfill me, right?
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Yeah, there you go. And I think you had the same thing with your personal project called Marv. Is you were kind of struggling with the process of the images that you were creating, and once you flipped the switch on that, you were completely content with the direction it was going.
Yeah. And I think it's also like with Marv specifically, it wasn't only just the process, but it was also like the technique that you're using has to resonate with like the deepest character or the DNA of the project. Let's put it like that, like the actual DNA of it.
Cool.
And yeah, I agree with you. You really need to love the actual techniques you're using to create your arts or your designs, right?
Exactly.
So like if you really hate 3D and using photos and being very precise about how you place a certain picture in the image, or what exact shape a cloud has, and manipulating that, and then don't apply at one pixel brush, right? But also, like, if you really don't like to paint stuff by scratch, don't apply at Blizzard.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So that's very important.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Now I think we've gone well over our 1 hour. Though I've
only just warmed up, man.
Yeah, me too. But we'll definitely do another one. But I do want to like end every podcast with a question to my guest, or more of a recommendation. And because we're kind of old school souls in a new digital era, I would like to ask you to recommend two things, like one book and one tutorial to the students. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be like the generic answers. But if it is, I completely understand, because they're one of the best. But one book and one tutorial would be great.
One book. And like an instructional book or
doesn't matter. Something that has inspired you to pursue your artistic career, or something that has helped you in your fundamentals. Can be anything. Just one book. Can
it be like one specific type of book?
Sure.
Like instead of one title, because I'm sure everyone will find those type of books. Like go to like your local thrift bookshop. You know, the ones that have the books that no one else wants to buy.
Okay.
You'll usually find books for like €3 or something, like really cheap, and then you have these books that just dive into one subject, like the jet engine, or I don't know, like whatever interests you, and buy that book and just put it I don't know, like on your toilet or something, and every time you go, you know, and do your business, you look through that book and you look at the pictures and you look at how it's put together, and just like marinate in those specific subject matters. I think that really helped me in understanding a lot of things.
Okay, cool.
And you'll find books on all sorts of subjects, and they cost hardly anything. And it can be anything like architecture or types of trees or insects or really anything. But like, get down into the book and really read it, because I also believe that a lot of people already know the classic books to read.
Of course, yeah.
And they're classics for a reason, man.
Yeah, it's very true.
Like, absolutely. And mind you, though, like there is one book that I would recommend, one specific one from the classics, and that would be Eye of the Painter by Andrew Loomis.
Yeah. Yes.
That's by far my favorite book.
Amazing book.
It's not like a step-by-step thing, or even like technical
It's very
knowledge.
intuitive. It's a very intuitive book.
Yeah, it basically teaches you like how to train your eye to see stuff like a painter does.
Yeah.
And that's really, really massive.
All right.
It almost lets you in like the knowledge of like a secret cult. You know?
Yeah. Duly noted.
And one tutorial, that's a hard one too, man. I would say, if you're like interested in similar stuff like me, like functional design and all, go to Mike Hill's Gumroad.
Oh yes.
And he has a few great tutorials on designing from the inside out.
Yeah.
And they're cheap as chips, so you know you don't have to spend a lot of money on it.
Yeah.
I would say like stay, and I don't want to like shoot other artists in the foot, but it's just like if you're still learning, like stay away from those speed painting tutorials.
Yeah.
Because there's so much going on under the hood that's not being narrated, and it can be very frustrating if you don't know exactly what they're talking about.
Yeah. that's what I touch on in one of my YouTube videos, is that if you look at the same tutorial as a beginner, as an intermediate, and as a professional, you can gain different sorts of information from that tutorial, because you just don't understand it when you're looking at it as a beginner.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So that can be a dangerous thing, but the ones you recommended are definitely good resources. So thank you very much, Maarten.
Yeah, man, you're welcome. You're welcome.
It's been an awesome talk.
Yeah, I've enjoyed this, man. I'll try to rant a little less next time. And,
we love the rant. We love the rant. I love to rant. So, on that note, we'll end it here. And thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. And we'll see you in the next one.
Cheers, guys.